Hello and welcome to Roofer's Coffee Shop, RLW. This is where you can read, listen, and watch amazing information. And today I am so honored to have Trent Cotney with Cotney Attorneys and Consultants. It is going to be an excellent webinar today. Welcome, Trent.
Hey, Heidi, it's always great to be here. I'm really looking forward to today's conversations.
I am too. But first, a few little housekeeping things, just so we get everybody in. On your control panel, please ask questions. We will be taking questions at the end of the session. So make your notes as you're going through. We have Megan Ellsworth in the background who will be chatting and taking those questions and getting them ready. Again, my name is Heidi Ellsworth, and I am the president of Roofer's Coffee Shop. And today we will be recording this. So you are able to see this anytime you want. It is up on our site, and like I said, you can read it, you can listen to it on our podcast channels, and you can watch it. So if you don't get all the notes you need today from all the great information that Trent is going to offer, just know that it's going to be out there waiting for you. So let's get started. As I said, I want to introduce Trent Cotney. He has been in the industry for a very long time and is so well known. Starting with a small firm out of Florida, Cotney Attorneys and Consultants are now nationwide. General Counsel for the National Roofing Contractors Association, General Counsel for Western States, Roofing Contractors Association, and it can go on. Oh, Florida, I gotta say Florida Roofers and Sheet Metal Contractors Association, sorry Lisa, FRSA. Trent helps contractors everywhere across the country. You name it, he's there along with his team of amazing attorneys and consultants. So as we really look at today, and Trent and I were talking about this webinar, he was like, there is so much risk out there right now. There's so much need for legal maintenance. So that's the topic. And I know you should have your pencils ready because this is going to be great. So Trent, welcome to the show.
Hey, Heidi, I tell you, it's always great talking to you. And, I'm really looking forward to this opportunity today because a lot of what I see out there, a lot of the legal problems that I get called into, they're really just business problems, right? And I think if you take sort of the time to mitigate risk up front, you can, hopefully just call me for a friendly chat rather than a legal dispute. So,
which is so much nicer. So,
exactly.
And Trent, you work across the board. It doesn't matter if it's commercial, residential, both, solar. I know you work in many other trades, HVAC. So maybe Megan's going to launch a poll right now, and we're going to look at what type of businesses you work for, just to kind of help Trent as he's sharing some thoughts in here. And Trent, maybe you can comment just a little bit on Cotney Attorneys and Consultants and all the different trades that you work with.
Sure. So as Heidi mentioned, we are nationwide. We're actually international. We've got 2 offices in Canada, soon to be 3. We're also in South Africa. And obviously we do specialize in roofing, but we represent all trades. We focus on representing the industry. We advocate for that. Obviously anything and everything related to legal issues, regardless of whether it's construction, employment, immigration, buying and selling businesses. That's what our company does. And on the consulting side, we do the same thing. We offer operations, estimating, HR, safety, and any type of consulting that you would need for your business. My goal in setting up this company was to make sure that we were the one-stop shop for anything that a contractor or trade needs. So very proud of the people I work with, and they made me look good. So it's been a blessing to be able to kind of see this company grow. And again, we're excited about this opportunity to be able to kind of give you some heads up on things that we see that you can possibly solve now before they become issues.
Yeah, I've watched you grow, Trent. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So Megan, why don't we go ahead and show everyone the poll results? And it looks like we are at 60% for both residential and commercial. So a great mix out there. Thank you all for being here. And Trent, let's go ahead and move on with our show.
All right.
Okay, so as we all know, one of the most important things is safety. I mean, the most important thing is the safety of all of our workers out there and of the industry as a whole. So how do you recommend for roofing contractors to stay current on all the changes that are going on?
So Heidi, this is one of the biggest issues that we face as a company, and that is making sure that our customers stay up to speed on whatever the current rules and regulations are. And just to kind of let the audience know, OSHA is the federal framework that governs how safety is enforced within construction. There's roughly 24 states that still follow the federal program, and then there are about 26 states that have their own state programs modeled after federal OSHA. So, Heidi, I know you're in Oregon, if you're in California, if you're in North Carolina, all these states have state plans, and oftentimes they're more stringent than the federal. So it's very important. We saw, especially in 2020 with COVID-19, states like California, it seemed like there was a new regulation every other week. And if you don't stay in touch with that, if you don't understand what the policies and procedures are, then you can get in real trouble. So one of the things that we really like to do is make sure that not only are we providing that information, but we encourage every contractor out there to make sure that your safety manual remains updated. This is not something that you even look at every year now. Okay, we recommend at least do it twice a year. Okay, and the kind of things I'm looking for are: do you have COVID-19 safety in there? Do you have hydration standards, heat, injury, and illness? Do you have signs of impairment? For those of you that have switched recently to recreational marijuana, do you have that in your safety manual? You need that in there. There's a whole host of things that are out there now that you need to change. And we stay in touch nationally through our national lobbyist, Craig Brydup, and he's been telling us that there's going to be a lot more changes coming, Heidi. Like, wow. I just heard yesterday there's going to be changes to the HAZCOM standards. They're engaged in rulemaking right now. So it's my job, it's our lawyers and consultants' jobs to make sure that we know not only what the law is now, but what's coming, so that we can make sure that we're updating those manuals. And then part and parcel with that idea is you got to have that culture of safety, right? It doesn't matter if you just got it in a document, you got to train. So that's where the toolbox talks and the ongoing training comes in, because if you don't have that, it's not management that gets you in trouble. It's the people that are on the roof, that are out there doing the actual labor that you need to make sure are being properly trained. So every penny you spend on safety is a penny well spent.
Right, and really understanding how to update that manual, how to get the right information. I mean, that's not easy, and it's very critical. And so you have that for all the states and on the federal level. Just real quick, as you're talking too about lobbyists and understanding what's coming down the pike, Cotney lobbying, I mean, you do this on a regular basis across the board with regulations, right?
Yeah, so I'm a lobbyist here in Florida, and then we use Craig Brydup and the Brydup Group nationally to assist us. And part of the reason that I got involved with that, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a politician. I'm a point A to point B kind of guy, right? But I've got to understand what the regulations are. What I saw over and over again, and many of our listeners can probably appreciate this, is all of a sudden you got a law or a regulation that comes up and you're like, where did this come from? And it completely changes your business. And I didn't want to sit back idly and see these kinds of regulations happening that affect our industry without having a say in it. So that's when I decided to get involved a few years ago here in Florida. And then we turned nationally because that's where a lot of the OSHA, a lot of the other stuff that we see from an immigration standpoint, workforce training, even right now we're working on the infrastructure stimulus that's coming out and how that works, what is that tied to, all that kind of stuff. So it never stops. That's it. It doesn't matter if you're in session, not in session, it never stops. So we view our role sort of as the sheepdog for the industry. We want to make sure that we are paying attention to everything out there, and to the extent that we can bring it in education or whatnot, we're trying to do that.
Wow. Wow. And I know you also spend a lot of time. I know a number of your attorneys were contractors before. They understand how important that is. And I mean, there's nothing scarier than that job site inspection. How should contractors be preparing for that?
So that's one of the things I really believe strongly in, and that is understanding and knowing what your rights are during an OSHA inspection. Everybody wants their employees to go home safe every single night. Okay. Mm-hmm. And clearly, anytime you're in any investigation, you always tell the truth, you always cooperate. But rarely does any OSHA inspector, whether it's on the federal or state level, tell you what you can do and what you don't have to do, right? So one of the things I really like to make sure everybody understands is that they not only go into a job with a job site safety plan, they understand what their rights are, they understand what's going on, but that you train your team members on how to deal with and how to respond to an OSHA investigation. You know, it's, Heidi, it's taking away that anxiety, you know, because it is. You've got, you know, we have OSHA come out and they'll say, hey, I'm a federal agent, I'm here, and it would freak me out, you know. So
Yeah.
what you want to do is you want to train your crew and just help them understand this is what they're asking for. Always tell the truth. We're not telling you to do anything otherwise, but remember your safety training. You know, remember this is how it goes. And to give you an example, you know, if you're a superintendent, you don't have to talk to OSHA without counsel present. Like you can have a member of management and counsel present. So if they ask for your witness interview, you don't necessarily have to do that, right? There are other things like, you know, you don't have to sign a written witness statement. Okay, you need to cooperate, but there are a lot of things like that that aren't easily available and aren't known. And that's one of the reasons, Heidi, that we just published our second book on OSHA Defense Know Your Rights. And right now for this week only, I've dropped it to cost. So if you go to Amazon, search my name, it's 99 cents for Kindle and I think $3.99 for the book for just this week. You know, and the reason I did that is I'm not making any money off of it, is I want to get the word out. And
Right.
it's a simple book. It applies across all industries. So I saw we had some manufacturers on here. It goes through what your rights are, you know, and it tells you this is what you can do, you know, how to cooperate, but how to assert, you know, your constitutional rights when you have that ability. So big believer in that. You know, it's always, I want an even playing field. Anytime government is involved, that's what I'm looking for.
Right. I think that's so important. And I think making that part of your safety manual and your safety training of really, I agree. I think sometimes that what happens if OSHA shows up doesn't always get connected in with everything else. And so you know, really being able to understand your employees and being able to continue to do the right things, I think is so important. And so really looking over your employee manual is also that kind of maintenance every year. Talk a little bit about that.
So crazy last year and a half, Heidi. I mean, we all know that, right? I mean, we had to adjust our employee manual a lot because there were a significant amount of COVID-19 related changes. You know, just to give the listeners some idea, you know, remote work, shared technology. How does that? Do you have a shared technology policy? Do you have the ability to look on people's equipment? You know, privacy rights. Do you have, what's your social media policy? You know, return to work policies, vaccination policies, all these different types of things. And look, everybody hates lawyers. I get that, right? But the idea behind this is that if you are taking the time to really make sure everybody has a playbook, then you don't need lawyers, right? That's the whole point is you want to make sure that you are explaining to your employees what the requirements are. You know, vaccination is a great example. That's you know, I've had people that say, hey, we don't want to require anything. I've had other people that say we want voluntary programs. I had one or two contractors say I want to make it mandatory. I can do any and all of the above, but the key is you got to back it into a policy. So that's really important. Okay. And the other thing I see, Heidi, is restrictive covenants. And I just want to talk to this because I know I got some people on the line here that are going to be interested in this. Okay. What are restrictive covenants? So if you're a member of management and you're about to hire a high level person, okay, it doesn't really apply to crew level, right? But let's say you're bringing on somebody in a VP type relationship. You want to make sure that you've got stuff to the extent that your state allows it. And each state is different. Some states allow this, some states don't. So you want to be able to say, look, you can't solicit my employees if you leave. If you gain proprietary or confidential information, you can't expose that after you leave. You can't go after my customers after you leave. You know, you need to have, some states allow for a non-compete, which means that you can't compete against me and another roofing company or another company that's similar to my business for X number of years in this geographic location. And obviously these are heavily litigated. There's a lot of law that goes, you know, behind this, but thinking about these policies in advance and securing them in advance. And here's the real key, Heidi, is you can have all these great policies, but if you don't have somebody internally checking to make sure that they got them, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a contractor, well, they sign a non-compete. And then I go to talk to the HR person. I say, well, where is it? And they don't have it signed. I'm like, that doesn't help me. What am I
No.
supposed to do with that? So that's the key thing is, once you get these policies and this onboarding type documentation in place, you want to make sure that you got it at your fingertips. That's always the key thing.
Right. Wow. It's, being a business owner myself, there is so much to this. It's just all the time. And now, and a little bit on I-9 audits also, because that we're kind of going into a lot of new administration, and that's all going to be changing probably too.
Right. Immigration is definitely something that we are monitoring very closely because it is all over the place. Recently they announced an increase to the H-2B visas to about 22,000. We've got a couple of contractors that are trying to take advantage of that. But I anticipate that there's going to be more changes along those lines. So what I recommend is, every year or so, take a look at your I-9s, and the key thing for those of you who don't know, I-9 is a document that shows that you are legally entitled to work here. So all your crew will have to sign it. Normally when these documents are signed, there's some paperwork that needs to be filled out. And the key thing that you're looking for is to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's. So if there's an inconsistency, if there's something that's not filled out, okay, if there's anything whatsoever, you need to try to remedy it before ICE shows up at your door knocking, right? And that's the key thing. And a lot of times there may be a lot of you that are in E-Verify states where a lot of this will come up through E-Verify, but there's still a duty to maintain I-9s to make sure that you're doing it correctly. The other thing is keep them separate. If you keep them separate and categorize so that you can put your hands on them really quick, that's important. One of the things that I've noticed, Heidi, is that when you get these government inspections, they want stuff quickly. And if you have to rifle through hundreds of employee files trying to find stuff, that could be difficult. So I like, regardless of whether it's OSHA and safety training or it's, ICE or whatever it is, I like to make sure that I can put my hands on it same day and I don't have to panic and worry about trying to find this stuff.
So maybe even duplicates, one in an employee file and one, just a file that can be handed over if there's an inspection.
Yeah, the one thing that you want to be careful about is to make sure that if you are maintaining, backup copies, that there is no, with I-9s, you want as little documentation as possible. And let me give you a great example of that, Heidi. So a lot of times your crew may present, the ID that they have to show in order to show citizenship. Okay, you're not required to keep that backup documentation. Okay, but if you keep it for one, you got to keep it for all. So I often get asked, what is my recommendation? Okay. My recommendation is I keep as little documentation as I have to, because there's always, the problem with that is there may be an inconsistency somewhere. So if you're keeping, a set of documents in one place and a set of documents the other, hopefully they match, because if they don't, then that's going to signal a red flag. So there's all these little nuances that from a risk mitigation standpoint, you can kind of think about. And that's one of the things that we like to do is we like to audit what a contractor's SOPs are, what their standard practices are, so we can figure out if there is something that need to be tweaked. So we go in occasionally and everything's running smoothly. We say, okay, good to go, right?
Yeah.
But if we see problems, what we can do is we can suggest a few tweaks here or there. And it's like everything in construction. If you spend time trying to fix the problem now, then it's not going to be a problem. But you run the risk that if you do get caught, it's going to be a big issue. So
right. Wow, that is really interesting. Well, I want to ask, we want to launch our second poll here and ask all of you is, how often do you review your employee mandate? Sorry, I'm going to say this the right way so it's out there, but how often do you review your company documents? So we're just talking about all these documents. How often do you review them? And quarterly, yearly, every 2 years, never, as needed? We'll let that go for a minute. So that's really important, Trent, right? What do you recommend for?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, with the amount of legislation and changes that have happened, you definitely, I'd recommend something more aggressive than yearly. And you may be in a state that has recently put some legislation out there which changes everything. If that's the case, you need to change it immediately.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of, gauge what you need to do. But I would say at a minimum, every 6 months is probably a good idea, just to make sure that you're on the up and up, and that review would include both HR and employee policies, safety policies, maybe I-9 maintenance, any other type of regulatory. There may be some DOT type guidance and updates that need to be done. If you're doing federal work, your certifications, a lot of the other stuff that needs to be filled out. It's like spring cleaning. You just go in, you clean out that garage, you make sure you're good to go, and then that way you're not going to have an issue.
Everything. Wow. Well, we have really interesting results here. About 7% are doing it quarterly, 53% yearly, 27% as needed, and 7% never. So I'm glad you're here. This is great. This is exactly what we want to be talking about. So as we kind of look through that, let's talk about that, Trent. Let's talk about employee manuals and really not only how important it is, like we just talked about with the pull and liabilities and everything, but also just overall how it's going to help your business.
Yeah. So one of the hardest parts of my job is onboarding and having to deal with employees. I love them all equally. So if you're listening, I love you. But it's tough. It's tough. I am a CEO. I am an owner, even though I'm a lawyer. So don't hold that against me. But it is tough. Dealing with employees is a constant struggle. So one of the things that you want to do is you always want to have definitive guidelines in your employee manuals. Now, please, if you're listening to this, I'd like you to pay attention to this. Okay. Where you get into trouble is disparate treatment. Okay. If you are treating one person differently than someone else, that's when you're going to get in trouble. Okay. So you need to have a policy that talks about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and you need to make sure it's consistent. It doesn't matter if it's your best producer or the person you just hired from work release. It's got to be consistent throughout, regardless of what you do. Right. Does that make sense? So from an employee manual standpoint, what I always do is I try to figure out what issues has a company had in the past. That's the first step, right? There's always stuff that you have to have an employee manual, right? That's the base.
Yeah.
But if you ran into a problem with an employee in the past and you don't have a specific policy that deals with that, shame on you, okay? Yeah. Every time you have an issue with an employee, you should make sure that there's something that addresses whatever that is in the employee manual, okay, in a legal way, so that you can go back, and if it happens again, then you've got a very clear policy on how you go about doing it. The other great thing about it, and just to kind of take a step back, when you're hiring someone, okay, you really want to make sure that that job description is definitive, okay? You need to not only say what you need for that person to do, but what their work requirements are. So if you need them to operate a forklift, or you need them to be able to lift 25 pounds over their head, or whatever the requirements are, that puts them in a box, right? And that box helps you define what their job duties are. That's very important for return to work, okay? Yeah. And the other aspect of that is your employee manual, your job descriptions help establish for-cause termination. So if they're showing up consistently late to work, if they are violating your company's technology policy, okay, if they have done any of the variety of things that I hear on a daily basis. I have everything from I had a guy pull a gun on somebody on top of a roof. One employee pull a gun on, and
wow.
That kind of stuff happens. It's part of roofing, and I'm used to it. I've got some crazy stories. So, any of that kind of stuff, clearly violations of the employee manual, but it'd be really nice if you had some that very specifically talks about that. So if you terminate them for cause, you can point to that policy, okay? Because a lot of times what I see is these employees that have just been terminated, they're looking for the bad guy lawyers to hire to try to make some kind of claim, okay? And you want to make sure everything is documented. Remember, Heidi, I've said this over and over again, the party with the best paper wins the day, okay? So if you are documenting every time they violated a policy, if it's 3-strike policy and they've done it once and twice and they're gone and everything is signed and you've talked about it, then you're in a much better position, not just from an employment standpoint, but from unemployment insurance or from any other agency that might be looking into what's going on.
And this really resonates with me because I'm in very much that same, just like you. I love all my employees, but man, I miss the days of just being all by myself, right?
Mhm.
And the having this spelled out is no matter what size business. It really, in fact, I think when you're smaller, the more you can get done on this earlier, the easier it'll be to grow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It is when I first, and I'll be honest, I'm being honest with the listeners right now. When I first opened the door, so I worked at big law firms for the first 15 years of my career. I've been in this business for 10 years now, about 10 years. When I first started off, I didn't have an employee manual because it was myself and I had a legal assistant and a clerk and whatnot. Now we're pushing 100 plus employees. So you'd be nuts not to have an employee manual, right?
Right.
And I did the same exact thing. Every time there was any kind of issue whatsoever, I wanted to make sure it was spelled out in that manual. A great example, Heidi, is you might be in a situation where you have provided extra training to someone, okay, over and above what normal workforce training is. And you can create a policy that allows for wage reduction in the event that they leave for a competitor. Okay, you need to be careful about minimum wage and overtime and all those kinds of things, but it can be crafted like that. Okay, what kind of
Yeah.
deductions are you going to take? Those are critical things that you need to focus on.
Wow. Wow. Well, let's shift gears. Talk about another risk that's going on right now, and that is contracts for
Right.
contractors and what they're doing. What is happening in this world?
So we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. I'm sure a lot of people have tuned in and say, why isn't Trent talking about material price increases and availability? Stay tuned. Okay, there's your hook. Okay, stay tuned. But let me talk about contracts in general. So we review dozens and dozens of contracts every week, okay, all over the US and Canada. It's what we get asked to review, a lot of contracts from, roofing contractors and other trades and GCs. So when we are reviewing them, I don't go through and look at provisions that I know don't matter necessarily from a legal standpoint. The, clean up your job site provision. I'm not going to pay attention to that, right? There are other provisions like that that just aren't as important. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for the stuff that can potentially really harm you. So the top of that list is indemnification. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it basically says, look, the classic indemnification provision says, if I did something wrong, then I'm going to hold you harmless for that. I'm not going to hold you liable for that. Okay. And often it says, I'll also defend you in the event that I did something wrong. But the language in there is very complex, and there's a lot of legal shenanigans that lawyers like to play in indemnification provisions. So what I like to do, Heidi, is there's three different examples of indemnification. There's broad form, intermediate, and limited. I like to always make it limited for my customer. Okay, now if I'm doing it downstream for a customer, then it's as broad as I can get it, right?
Right.
Recognize that every single state is different, but that's one of the key things. The next thing I'd talk about is contingent payment. Now, not every state has this, Heidi, but it's commonly referred to as a pay if paid clause. And it says, I, the contractor, do not have to pay you, the sub, until I'm paid by the owner. Okay. And there's magic
Yeah.
language that needs to be in there, but it's a nasty, nasty provision. So I'm looking for that. And I'm trying to just I got a little pin here. I'm just trying to make a few little touches just to get rid of that provision. I don't want to go like this, because if I do that, then the magnifying glass is going to be on it. I'm just looking to just, and then knock out a word or two so that it gets it to where we got to go. Insurance provisions. Okay. Now, let me give you some real world help here. Many of you might just give additional insured status, commonly referred to as AI. That's not artificial intelligence, but additional insured status, to your customers without thinking twice about it, because it doesn't cost you anything up front. Okay. So you may, if you've got a prime contractor that you're working for, general contractor, and the general contractor wants you to give them additional insured status, the owner and the architect, and you do that, okay? The risk that you run there is that they have the ability to step into your shoes as the insured and potentially make claims on your policy, including attorney's fees, okay? And it never becomes an issue until it's an issue, and then you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? Okay, so when you see additional insured status, push back against it, okay? Push back against everyone that is not your customer, okay? Seek to limit it to claims evolving out of your own bad acts or omissions, okay? You don't want a ever expansive list of stuff that it could apply to. And I agree with that. Look, if I screwed something up, in life or in contracts, I'm going to own it, right? That I think is fair. But saying that I should identify everybody under the sun or provide insurance to everybody under the sun, I don't agree with that. So, now the last thing I would mention to you, Heidi, and there's obviously I could spend hours talking about contracts, but notice provisions, you got to watch out for those notice provisions. Okay, if it says you've got X number of days to submit a claim for delay, so for those of you that are material shortage issues, have you submitted your delay claims? Because if you haven't, I guarantee there's a notice provision in your contract that says that you got X number of days to do it. Classic example is AIA has 21 days from the date of the claim. If I'm drafting a contract downstream, I like to do 48 hours notice, just because usually it involves some kind of water intrusion. So I want to know about it sooner rather than later.
Wow. This so much, I just want to say at this point, if this is the part you're kind of like watching this and saying, my mind's just boggled over all this with the contracts. Cotney, Trent, you have so much of this information on your website and also on our website on Rufus Coffee Shop. So we're just kind of hitting the highlights on this today, but just know there, I mean, Trent, like you've done 3-4 hour at the legal conference, you talk about this all day long. So it's a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And Heidi's right. We're just hitting the high points here. Really, the point of this slide is to help you issue spot, right? And just get your mind thinking about what's really important. There's so many contractors out there that just take whatever's on the street and they just want the work and they're not thinking about the potential risk, right? And that's what I want to hit home with this slide is think about the risk in advance, okay? My dad, very smart man, he told me it's the customers you don't take that make you successful. I had no idea what he meant until I opened my own business, and now I know exactly what it means.
Yeah.
So
ones you just need to turn around and walk away from. Yeah.
There you go.
I love it. Well, okay, then when you're looking at kind of taking this one step further too, very roofing specific, what are some of the high points?
Yeah, so there, if I don't have 100 specific roofing provisions, then I'm off. I've got tons of them, but I want to just hit the highlights. So I saw that we had a lot of contractors that are either residential or mixed residential commercial. All those form agreements are great, but they don't know roofing, right? So what I like to do is have very specific provisions about the problems that I experience on job sites. And, obviously the driveway disclaimer, this is a very specific provision that talks about driveway cracks. How many of you that do residential work have heard, I don't want to pay your bill because there's a crack on the driveway, and it's not yours, right?
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't it be nice to have a discloimer there? And that says that you're not liable if there's any cracks, that you recognize that, customer recognizes that there's heavy machinery going to be used to, load to rooftop the materials. And in the event that they want you to hand load it, there's an extra charge for that. Okay, so that's the way you get them to sign off on that. Second one, Heidi, is color match. So a lot of times if you're called out to do a repair or maintenance, it's very difficult to match colors, especially UV over time destroys everything. So I've had this come up a lot. It's an aesthetic issue, but it hurts street value. So I understand it. But what I like to do is say, look, we will take best efforts to make sure we can try to match color, but there are no guarantees. And you understand that, and we're still going to do this work. Okay. And it's part of a contract is not just, your sword or your shield, Heidi. It's about educating your customer. It's about having something, the contract is the trench that you fall back into when customer service doesn't work, right? So it's great to have these educational type provisions as well, because it may help you get off center. And that's really the goal.
It's really about setting realistic expectations with your customers.
Absolutely. That's all it is. And, customer maintenance, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That is the key. Is rule of thumb is 1 out of every 20 jobs, you're going to have a blip on that you can usually resolve pretty easily. 1 out of every 50, there's going to be some where you're going to have to get some money back. You're going to have to do some extra work, or God forbid, you got to get a lawyer. So that's just something that I've seen, it's a pretty constant statistic of what I see over the years. So next thing I'll talk about, Heidi, is oil canning. So for those of you that do metal work, this has always been a big issue. And oil canning, for those of you who don't know, if you have, a food can, you think about an oil can that's got the ripples on the side, that's what it looks like aesthetically. Because what happens is it often happens with lower gauge metal, or it could happen, you don't really notice it until you install it. Okay, so
Mhm.
what I like to do is make sure that either I've addressed it from a scope standpoint by speccing a higher gauge metal, or figuring out how not to do as long a span, or I like to have an oil canning disclaimer in there that really says, look, I'm not liable for this. It's aesthetic. I'll do my best to deal with it. I can work with you on replacement costs, but at the end of the day, I'm not liable. Okay, so that's just another, again, different type of system, but every system has a different contract provision that usually governs it, right?
Right.
So this next one, it applies across the board, and that's interior protection. So one of the things I like to do is to make sure that the customer has knowledge that once roofing work starts, regardless of whether it's low slope or steep slope, that it's possible that debris may fall from the ceiling. Okay, you may have, I've had a lot of, big box stores where fireproofing or insulation have fallen and personal injury suits have happened. I've had to deal with that. On the residential side, I've had both condos and homeowners complain that, their paintings fell off the wall, or there was dust, there was this, and they've got allergies and da 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 da. Well, if you got a provision that addresses that and says that, look, you assume the risk, you agree to make sure that you're doing whatever you can to protect your interior belongings, then that helps alleviate, helps mitigate some of the potential risk. And that's the goal with that one. And then
Right.
last one I want to mention, Heidi, and this is the big one. Okay, you guys need to pay attention to this. Okay, this is the biggest one. The acceptance of deck. Okay, again, doesn't matter whether it's low slope or it's steep slope. Okay, when you're going out there to do work, the only thing that you're responsible for is investigating the surface of the deck, unless it's said otherwise. Okay, now I'm going to give you two examples of why this is important. On a steep slope standpoint, let's say you're doing a shingle job, you go out there, you remove the roof, and you see that there's damaged plywood. Okay, and you replace that plywood, but what you don't see is on the interior in the attic that you probably didn't have an opportunity to inspect, is that there's some water spots on other ones. Okay, so the homeowner wants to hold you liable for those pieces of decking that you didn't pull up. Okay, your argument is, hey, this isn't damaged enough, but wouldn't it be great to say, I'm not liable because all I was responsible for was the surface area that I saw from the front view.
Right.
On
Right.
the commercial side of things, the low slope, moisture content, it's a big issue, so you're not liable for moisture content. You're not liable for undulations in the roof system, regardless of whether it's steep slope or low slope, if it's caused by structural issues. I like to address all that, and the reason I do that is because I've had so many claims or alleged justifications for non-payment come out of that, and I'm tired of it. And that's
Yeah.
that's why I like to include this kind of stuff. Look, your documents, your contracts, your manuals, they are living, breathing documents. Okay, every time
Mhm.
you have an issue, there should be an adjustment, right? Because you
Right.
don't. Shame on you the first time. If you haven't addressed it after that, then it's going to be a big issue.
Yeah, I love that thing that when something happens, actually write it down, sit down with your team and look at your documents and make sure you're talking about it. Make sure it's been documented or the changes need to be made. That makes so much sense. I don't think people think that way. At least that's something I'm writing down right now as a nugget,
Mm.
because I need to do a bunch of this. So you had just said earlier that we were going to get into material shortages, which is the top of the spectrum right now. So let's launch our next poll question. And we want to know how material shortages are affecting your business. And that should have business on the end of it. So please let us know. So Trent, it looks like it's going to be pretty much yes. It is affecting their businesses.
Yeah, that's
What
consistent.
is happening there?
So the material shortages and material price increase issues, just to set the stage, we've entered sort of a perfect storm right now. And, a lot of people point the finger at COVID-19. It's not really COVID-19 as much as it is everything else, right? So we had, trade war, we had tariffs that caused some price increases. We've had the Suez Canal blockage. We had the Texas refinery shutdown. We had major storms, all which hit, additional petroleum refineries in Louisiana last year. We had El Derecho in Iowa, the storm that caused, billions of dollars worth of damage. We have had raw material shortages, right? 87%, look at that. Raw material shortages that make up a lot of the materials that you use because they can't source it from countries like India. I'm sure you've seen the issues that India is having with COVID-19 right now. Well, a lot of our chemicals are sourced from there. There's a semiconductor shortage, so the equipment that you might need. So we have just entered the absolute perfect storm. I have never experienced anything like this in the 20 plus years I've been, a lawyer. The only other time in history that I can think that we had this kind of level of shortage or need would have been World War II, or somewhere around the war where materials needed to be repurposed for the war effort. But this is absolutely crazy. So there are two different topics that I want to talk about sort of briefly, and that is, how do you deal with this in your contract now, and how do you negotiate it? What happens if you got an existing contract? And I'm sure that's what everybody really wants to know, right? So with regard to contracts that you've got now, okay, that you are in the process of bidding or you've got a proposal on, there's a variety of provisions that you want to make sure that you have in your contract. Okay, you want to have a price acceleration provision. Okay, and what I will do, Heidi, is you tell me the best way to do this. I will get these provisions to your listeners, and you tell me whatever the best way is for me to do that so that they've got it. Okay.
Yes, we will. We'll get those written up and we'll have it on the RLW page for them to download.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes.
So first is price acceleration provision. And what that says is for every material line item that goes up by more than 5% after the execution of the contract, or whatever percentage you choose, I try to be fair, right? Then you are entitled to, equitable adjustment of the contract. Okay. The other provisions I like to have are material availability, which basically says, look, you're informing the customer that due to this, global crisis, there is a shortage of materials. The lead time has been extended to 2 to 4 weeks on your job site. Here's a letter from the manufacturer. This is what's going on. You have to work with me, and you're going to give me an extension of time to the extent that I need it because of this issue.
Right.
Last provision that I really like to see in there is a substitution of materials, which allows you to potentially substitute a comparable material that may be available or a comparable system that might be available. The problem that you really need to focus on there is watch out for your warranties. Okay. When you start mixing, it's not apples to apples and it's apples to oranges, that's when manufacturers get angry and you don't get warranties and I get phone calls. So make sure that you are focused on that. Now, Heidi, if you go back to the previous slide, I wanted to get those provisions out first. What I want to talk to you a little bit about is just pricing in general. Okay. One of the things you really need to think about is, most of you price in lump sum or fixed price, and you include materials in that. But consider carving out as much as you can as far as materials. So the days of being able to quote prices and say these prices are good for 30 days, that's gone. Take that out of your contract, because I got a notice from a manufacturer that was sent to me, 100% increase day over day. Okay, you can't account for that, right? So that's why I like those provisions, because it gives you flexibility. Consider time and materials components in your contract. So if you're, for example, a residential roofer, one of the things that you really want to pay attention to is the stuff that that you're going to have to change. Decking, it could be soffit, it could be gutter, unit price type stuff, right? Make sure that it's okay to spell out a labor rate if you want, but on the materials, say actual cost plus X. Okay, give yourself some wiggle room, because if you have, $50 per sheet of plywood, you're probably going to lose money. There are some places where you might still be able to get that, but I've still got some in the warehouse if you guys need any, right? So hit me up later. But that's a big concern. Okay. To the extent that you can, make sure that you are carving out exceptions for price increases. Okay. Think about using specifications or plan notes or your exhibits or other contract documents to get that in there. Okay, and that's a critical thing. Okay.
I like how you've put all this together, because it really is, there's key things, and it's changing day. I'm the same way. I have never seen, I thought it was bad in 2008 in the recession, and when we were out there trying to sell, this is totally the opposite. The demand continues to grow and the materials get harder to obtain. So we're seeing it everywhere. So as these contractors are working with their manufacturers and the distributors, and I would say especially the distributors, what's some of your advice?
So it's very easy to point fingers at manufacturers or suppliers, but really, from my perspective, we're all in this together to a certain extent, and the most important thing in any issue is the customer. Okay, it's always the customer. If the customer is happy, then you are happy, right? So what I like to try to do is figure out a political solution that can help resolve the customer's fears. Working with distributors. So distributors are in a very difficult position right now, and I get that. I've had some very honest conversations with them, but recognize that you might have the ability to lock in pricing, pre-purchase materials for things that you need. Now, Heidi, I have heard word that there are, some contractors that are sort of speculating on materials, that are hoarding materials. Be careful with that, because if you don't have existing contracts in hand, then you're burning through cash, right? So
Yeah.
make sure that you've got existing contracts. Plywood's a pretty safe bet. Okay, that's, I just published something on LinkedIn about increased tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. So what's going to happen? You're going to have higher prices. So recognize that. But to the extent that you've got a good reputation, if you're a large company, if you've had a good long-lasting relationship with a supplier, you can lean on that, and see how they can help you, and negotiate storage, look for rebate opportunities. And if you don't have that relationship, now's the time to start building it. Make sure that you develop those kind of relationships with a good system of distributors that can kind of help you through this.
Yeah, and I would look at the bigger picture too, of as you're working with those distributors, really look at their bigger programs, what they can offer to you, and how you can really build that relationship. And you're right, if you haven't already, this is the time you really need that relationship, really focus on that and focus on some of the other things they can offer to help too, because the distribution brings a lot to the game. I mean, a lot of technology, a lot of great things that can help through all this. The Trent, negotiating change orders. This cannot be always a happy situation.
It's not. And one other thing I would mention, before we get to this, is for the manufacturers and suppliers that are on the line, one of the best things that I can use for contractors is a letter from you saying that this is unforeseeable, that it's unforeseen, and better yet, it's force majeure. Because what I do is I take that great letter, you gave me a softball, thank you, okay? Because then I can attach it to a change order, and now I've got something I can work with. So let me give you sort of a breakdown on how to negotiate. If you got an existing contract, what do you do for this material price increase, material shortage issue? Well, the basic starting point is that you have to have consideration in order to get a change, right? What additional consideration are you offering in order to get this price increase? You can go to an owner and say, hey, my prices just went up 15%, will you pay it? And if they sign your change order, great. But if I was the owner, I would say, pound sand, I don't owe you anything else than what we contracted for. So I have been able to successfully negotiate, say, look, pay this price increase, I'll extend my workmanship warranty by a couple of years. Okay, it's not great, but it's an idea. Okay. I like to use a 4-prong approach to negotiating. Okay, and I want to give this, I'm spending tomorrow, actually, we are doing a hour-long presentation on expert level contract negotiation. It is deep level. Okay, I've never talked about any of it. It is very advanced stuff, but I go into it in detail much there, but I want to give you the high level view right now. There are 4 steps. Okay, step 1, you need to set the stage. Okay, set the stage with your customer. And that means, remember I talked about those letters from manufacturers or industry associations saying this is never before seen. You want that key language, unforeseeable, unforeseen. Okay, that's going to set the stage. Part 2 is you need to take your contract. Okay, go through your contract and identify any provision whatsoever that will give you a colorable argument to submit a claim. So what do I mean by that? Well, force majeure, act of God. That's an event that happens that is so unforeseeable that it excuses your performance. Okay, so if your some provisions actually call out unavailability of materials, but if it doesn't, you may still be able to argue that this event has frustrated the purpose of this contract. It is now impossible to perform. And both of those two are legal terms of art, right? So that gives you a potential argument. Okay, another thing to look for, Heidi, and not to get too in the weeds, but delay claims. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Classic example of this, Heidi, is, we're about to enter storm season. If you had a year-long project, but there was a shutdown that occurred from January to March, that's now pushing you into the storm season, then you are going to be delayed because it rains every single day here in Tampa, right? And that means you're not going to be able to do the kind of work that you need to get done. So that can potentially form the basis of a delay claim because of that delay that occurred previously before this issue hit. Hopefully the listeners are following what I'm saying here, because
Yeah.
what that gives you is a colorable argument to say, had you not delayed me back in January, I would have already had this material purchased and loaded, but for the fact that you did this. So
Right.
therefore, this forms the basis of a change. So you come up with those provisions. So 1, set the stage. 2, review your contract. 3, okay, submit your claim or your change order. Follow the contract terms, submit that claim, talk about what's there, okay, and advocate. Advocate. Don't just push paper. Don't just say, oh, well, woe is me.
Let's see.
You've got to come from a position of strength, okay? You've got to come from a position of strength. And then the 4th element, Heidi, is you pick up the phone, then you negotiate. Then you negotiate, okay? If you start at number 4 and you pick up the phone and you say, hey, I'm really hurting here, can you just pay me some more money? That's not a position of strength. But if you did all those other steps and you're really tracking the contract, and then the other side's scratching their head going, wow, this is, they're citing the chapter and verse of the contract, what's going on here? Then at least maybe you can say, hey, let's split the difference. Right. Or, give me some more time, or work with me, right? But that has been the most successful approach overall. And then obviously you get into the weeds more from that. Every contract, every project is specific. Your political, affiliations with customers are different. So you want to make sure that you've got, the whole gambit of potential options at your fingertips.
Okay, so I have to tell you, Trent, you just totally bring me in, because I'm making notes as we're sitting here, and I'm thinking I'm not supposed to be making notes, but I am, because I love that. I love that how you work your way through it so that by the time you're on the phone, you're bringing them together. And this is the kind of stuff. So tomorrow you're going to go even deeper into this, right?
Yeah. Tomorrow is so you guys know me as this, right? This is Trent Cotney, the guy that comes on webinars, advocates, intercedes. Okay. Tomorrow, I'm showing you what really goes on behind the scenes. What the lawyer aspect of it. Okay. And my job when I'm hired, Heidi, is to advocate and to win for the client. Right. That is my job. So I'm getting into the deep levels of how this works. But looking at it, just giving you some nuggets, that's the key things right there. Those are, you want to start off there and always come from a position of strength, because if you don't, then if you're like me, you're going to sniff weakness, and there's not going to be anything to negotiate. So.
Well, I can tell you from my own experience, and you actually have told me this in the past, where you said, Heidi, my job is that you shouldn't even have to think about this anymore. That you go on, do your business, I've got your back, and we're going. So I think that being that advocate is so critical, because, and you said a couple times, like, you might not like lawyers or not, but I'm telling you right now, everyone who's listening, that this working with you and your team just totally throws that out the door to me. I don't even think of you as a lawyer. I just think
that's the best compliment I could ever get.
There you go.
That's it right there. That's the best compliment I could get. So
that's just how it is. So what we are going to do here is we are going to do a poll question. And this poll question is actually if you're interested in talking to Trent and his team about more, about would you be interested in a consultation? And a consultation, I have to tell you, is really all about not as much, there's no sales involved. I'm just telling you that right now. It's about a consultation. I do it all the time. Trent helps me. I'm like, I don't know about this. Can you help? So if you're interested, go ahead and mark that up. And in the meantime, we're going to take some questions. So Megan, I have a question here, and that Trent, we had a great question come in earlier. We have a couple here. So let me just pull these over for you, and we will get these questions out. The first one we had was from Andy. Hello, Andy. I'm the new board member for RT3, by the way, Andy Centaro. Yeah, reading ahead, we are a union shop. Would you recommend the safety staff or foreman giving the toolbox talks? Interested to hear your thoughts in general terms.
So that's a great question, Andy. And, we work with a lot of union shops, fabulous programs as far as safety and apprenticeship and a lot of other things that are going on. And, one of the things that I've noticed is oftentimes when a safety directors are usually more knowledgeable in the ins and outs of safety, right? They understand it, that's their job. But I've noticed that when the crew really pays attention to the foreman or the crew leader, that's who they're going to look up to, because they know that their lives are in that person's hands. So a lot of times what I like to see, Andy, is I like to see a joint presentation where there's that pullover. So the safety director and the foreman are working hand in hand. And what that does, Andy, is it ties management all the way down to the crew, and it forms that culture of safety, which is one of the things that OSHA's looking for. But I definitely think I've noticed over the years that if I can convert a crew leader over to what I'm saying as far as making sure that they're safe on a job site, then I know the crew's going to fall in line, right?
Yeah.
So I know exactly where you're coming from on that question. That's a great question.
Wow. And then we had one other question. Andy said thank you. We had one other question here, just kind of and we talked a little bit with the employees, we talked about the thing, but we really have this trifecta of not just material shortages and price increases, but also labor shortages. So is that kind of part of, as you're talking about contracts and watching for certain things, can labor shortages, is there any help there?
Yeah, so labor has been an issue for years and years and years, and lack of skilled labor continues to be a problem, especially, with a lot of the other things that I'm seeing from stimulus packages. So to give you an idea, there's a $4 trillion suggested infrastructure package. The problem is we don't have the workers or the materials to do the work now. So even if there was that out there, how is that going to get done? And a bigger concern is that if we can't do the work, are we going to lose more workers to the road constructors and the bridge builders that do have the capability of doing the work, right? So I am always concerned about labor. Workforce training is something I'm very passionate about. So it's something that I think is definitely important. To answer that question, you can modify a price acceleration to include, the standard provision includes both materials and equipment, but you can also talk about labor rates in there. So that if your labor rates, for example, to go back to Andy, union shops, they publish their rates periodically, and depending on when your project is, you may have a labor rate increase. So if you end up with a delay, your labor rates may shoot up. So you obviously want to make sure that you're accounting for that in your contract. And what I like to do is through either a combination of that acceleration provision or other provisions, just say, hey, you understand this is what it is now, but if it goes past a certain rate, then that's what it's going to be. Now, the one thing I will say, Heidi, right now is lack of skilled labor is still an issue, okay? But I am not seeing the volatility in price on the labor side that I'm seeing on the material side. Okay. So if for some reason that becomes a big issue, then you definitely want to figure that out. If you are bidding a job and you don't have the production capability to do it, then you shouldn't bid the job. So the only other options are sub crews or working with other contractors that to potentially finish that job. And there are a lot of contractors out there. The stats that I've seen, roughly 70% of residential, roughly 40% of commercial use sub labor. Okay, so if you have sub labor crews that you can fall back on in the event that you need them, that may be a decent resource. But yes, there are ways to counteract that. I see it mainly with price increase. Availability is a little bit more difficult because you're kind of expected to have that production capability.
Wow. Well, Trent, We are at the end of our hour, but I have to say thank you so much. I've learned tons. As I said, I was taking some notes, and I'm sure everybody else. So to get a hold of you, it's very simple. Megan's just put it in the chat. It's up here, cotneycl.com. You can find Trent everywhere. You can find him on the Roofers Coffee Shop, huge amounts of articles and information in the directory, podcasts, webinars, really, and through all the associations too. So Trent, thank you for everything you do for the industry. It's pretty amazing.
Well, Heidi, right back at you. So, I really appreciate you. I appreciate Roofers Coffee Shop. And I want to thank the listeners. I'm here to answer questions that you got. I love this industry. It's, you guys can probably attest to the same thing. Once it gets in your blood, it never gets out. So I'm just very fortunate and blessed that, I can give back. And that's what I really like doing. So, feel free to ask me questions. I'll answer anything that you got. So.
Sounds great. Sounds great. And I want to thank all of you for being here today, for listening, for being a part of this RLW. As we said, it is recorded and it will be available online within the next 24 hours. So you can listen to it, watch it, or read it. Find all of the RLWs under our Read, Listen, Watch section of the website at rooferscoffeeshop.com. So next month, June 30th, we are going to have something, Trent, that I know you're very interested in, but we are going to have the experts at Java talking about bidirectional technology. What does that mean? It is where data talks to each other, software, the platforms talk to each other, and data goes in and it goes out, which every contractor out there is looking for. So if you want your project management to talk to your accounting, to talk to your CRM, you need to be here on June 30th, same time, 11 o'clock, and we will see you all then. Thank you, Trent, and thank you everybody for listening. Have a great day.